My phone buzzed mid-meeting, the alert lighting up my screen with a single line that made my blood run cold. Bodycam stream. Emergency motion detected, van door opened forcefully. I tapped the screen, half expecting a malfunction. Instead, the live feed opened with the worst possible sight. Two bulky men dragging my wheelchair-bound uncle from his van like a sack of groceries, while a smug woman in a pastel blouse sipped coffee and gave them a slow clap from the curb. The audio caught her voice clear as day. He brought this on himself. That smug woman was Karen Pendleton, the HOA president. And the van? It wasn't just any van, it was my uncle's lifeline. And it just so happened to be wired with a bodycam I installed last summer that streamed straight to me. And I wasn't just any niece, I was a DOJ investigator. It all started about 2 months ago when Uncle Marty moved into Magnolia Hills, a supposedly peaceful, gated community with a glossy brochure, a smiling security booth, and a thick HOA handbook that weighed more than a brick. The reason he moved there wasn't luxury, it was necessity. After a spinal cord injury from a construction accident and years of surgeries, he needed somewhere flat, quiet, and with fast access to medical help. Magnolia Hills looked perfect on paper. Except paper doesn't mention people like Karen. Karen Pendleton ran the HOA like a dictatorship. Her hair never moved. Her outfit always matched her car. And her mood? Always just a few inches from combustion. If your flower pots were too whimsical, she'd fine you. If your mailbox was off-brand, she'd fine you again. And if your vehicle wasn't on her imaginary approved list, you'd better run. Uncle Marty didn't run. He rolled, literally. His van was a fully customized wheelchair-accessible ride that made it possible for him to go to therapy, shop, and live independently. But the moment Karen saw it, she treated it like a war crime. "It's a commercial vehicle," she snapped the first week. "This isn't a parking lot for circus trucks." Never mind that it was licensed, plated, and parked legally in the designated visitor space. Every time he parked, she left a note. Sometimes it was typed and passive-aggressive. Sometimes it was scribbled in red pen, all caps like a teenage threat letter. He saved every single one. I visited him every Saturday. We drink too much tea, argue over whether to watch mystery or sci-fi, and I'd make sure his door sensors, chair lifts, and surveillance cams were working. I'm not just protective, I'm thorough. I work for the Department of Justice, specializing in civil rights and ADA enforcement. But Uncle Marty didn't want me to intervene. "She's just a cranky neighbor," he said the first time I brought up her behavior. "She'll get bored eventually." But Karen didn't get bored. She escalated. 2 weeks ago, she called a special HOA meeting, just to discuss non-compliant vehicles. Only 2 people showed up, and both were her friends. She claimed she had the right to tow any unauthorized mobile structures, which apparently included Uncle Marty's van. Then, she formed her own compliance task force. 2 gym rats she paid in free smoothies from her sister's juice bar. They wore sunglasses, matching shirts that said HOA Patrol, and thought they were starring in an action movie. Everyone else in the community just laughed. Until today. Today was a Tuesday. Uncle Marty had just returned from a hospital checkup. He parked in the same spot he always used, the one marked for visitors next to the clubhouse. He left his disabled permit clearly on display. He was reaching for his chair lift remote when the patrol showed up. One guy banged on the window, while the other pulled open the van's side door. Karen stood nearby, arms folded, phone out, recording. Marty tried to explain. The guy yanked harder. That's when the camera triggered and streamed the entire thing straight to me, in high-definition horror. I don't remember driving. I just remember arriving. I parked sideways in the clubhouse lot, DOJ badge already around my neck, fists clenched. Marty was still on the ground, his wheelchair knocked over. One of the gym bros stood nearby, looking more confused than guilty. Karen turned, saw me, and smiled like I was the problem. "Oh, Lena," she purred, "you're just in time to help move this thing." He's been warned. That's all she got out before I walked past her and straight to my uncle. He was bruised, pale, but conscious. They grabbed me like I was trespassing, he muttered, his voice shaking more from rage than pain. I knelt next to him. It's all recorded, I said quietly. And they just signed their own legal tombstones. I turned back to Karen, who had taken a step back and was suddenly a little less smug. Ma'am, I said, with full courtroom calm, you and your hired thugs just violated federal disability law, committed battery, impersonated enforcement, and attempted vehicle seizure without due process. Did I leave anything out? One of the gym guys started backing away. I didn't touch him, man. I thought this was like legal or whatever. Karen huffed. This is an HOA matter. I pulled out my phone and hit play. The audio filled the air, her voice, crystal clear, saying, "He brought this on himself." Residents began stepping out of their homes, drawn by the commotion. Some had their phones out. I didn't mind. I helped Uncle Marty back into his wheelchair. A neighbor brought out ice and water. Karen stood frozen, looking like a statue cracked in the sun. Expect a subpoena, I told her. This isn't over. It's just beginning. Her face twitched like she wanted to scream, but she just turned and stormed away toward her manicured lawn. The HOA patrol guys had already scattered. Back inside Marty's place, I reviewed every second of the footage. The camera in the van had captured everything, from the moment they opened the door to the last smug comment Karen made before I arrived. I emailed it to my DOJ contact, marked urgent. I knew protocol. I knew chain of command. But more than anything, I knew justice was coming, and it was bringing paperwork, penalties, and headlines. As the sun set over the pristine little houses of Magnolia Hills, I looked at my uncle sipping tea with trembling hands. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. "I will be," he said. "Especially now that she messed with the wrong niece." We both smiled. The neighborhood didn't know it yet, but a storm was coming, and I was its forecast. The morning after the assault on Uncle Marty felt eerily quiet in Magnolia Hills, like the calm before a courtroom hurricane. I spent the night gathering every scrap of evidence, stitching timelines, saving backup copies of Bodycam footage to 3 separate encrypted drives. DOJ protocol had a certain poetry to it: follow the law like a surgeon follows a heartbeat, precise and unrelenting. Uncle Marty, meanwhile, tried to distract himself with a crossword puzzle and half a slice of toast, but his eyes kept drifting to the van parked outside, now dented and scraped from the previous day's chaos. I didn't push him to talk. His silence said more than his words ever could. I called in favors before breakfast. 2 ADA compliance officers from the Justice Department agreed to start an informal review while I prepared a full complaint. I also flagged the footage to a senior ADA attorney who'd once prosecuted a nursing home chain for a similar abuse of disabled patients. As I clicked through public records and HOA filings, I realized Karen Pendleton's resume of tyranny went further than I thought. Complaints from previous residents had been buried in HOA meetings and quietly withdrawn, probably under pressure. She had fined a disabled couple last year for installing a wheelchair ramp, citing exterior modification without approval. One elderly man was forced to remove a stair lift on his porch because it clashed with the community theme. It wasn't just about Uncle Marty. This was a pattern. Around noon, I walked the neighborhood, low profile but observant. I wore jeans and a plain hoodie, my badge tucked away. I wasn't there to intimidate, just to listen. It didn't take long before residents began cautiously engaging. A retired couple with a barking Yorkie whispered their own horror story of being fined $300 because their granddaughter parked on the curb. Another neighbor, a nurse who worked night shifts, confided that the HOA had threatened to report her for unauthorized business activity because she stored scrubs and medical supplies in her garage. Everyone had a story. Everyone was scared. And yet, the moment I mentioned what happened to Uncle Marty, something shifted. The fear turned into something else: anger, resolve, solidarity. I compiled the stories, noting the timeline and patterns. It was becoming clear. Karen had built a little empire based on intimidation, fraudulent fines, and arbitrary enforcement. Her power didn't come from law. It came from people being too exhausted or too polite to fight back. But that changed the moment she crossed someone with federal authority and a camera feed. By late afternoon, my inbox pinged with a reply from the ADA enforcement team. The preliminary review confirmed it. Uncle Marty's rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act had been clearly violated. There was enough to initiate a formal investigation. I was instructed to gather any additional resident testimonies and begin the process for a federal injunction against the HOA if they continued retaliatory behavior. I smiled to myself. The first domino had fallen. Of course, Karen wasn't going down quietly. That same evening, a fresh violation notice was posted on Uncle Marty's door. Hand-delivered, not mailed. The envelope looked official, but the contents were pure fiction. It accused him of vehicular obstruction of community access, refusal to comply with verbal HOA directives, and a ridiculous hostile engagement with HOA representatives. The fine? $1,500, payable in 48 hours. It wasn't just intimidation. It was a legal dare. Karen was betting that Marty would panic, cave, and move out. But instead, I scanned the notice, forwarded it to my DOJ contact, and walked over to Karen's house with my phone set to record. She opened the door in silk pajamas, holding a glass of wine like she was the queen of a cul-de-sac castle. Before she could speak, I held up the violation notice. "This qualifies as retaliation under federal law," I said calmly. "The ADA doesn't just protect access. It protects dignity. And this," I shook the paper, "this is going to look real nice in a courtroom." Karen didn't flinch. "This is private property," she snapped. "You're trespassing." I turned my phone so she could see the recording indicator. "You've been notified," I said. "Any further action against my uncle or others in this community will be entered into a federal complaint. You should consult legal counsel." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away as her mouth opened and closed like a stunned goldfish. That night, I created a secure online form for community members to submit their HOA grievances anonymously. By midnight, I had 12 submissions, each one with a different angle on Karen's antics. One person reported being threatened for planting unapproved sunflowers. Another claimed their children weren't allowed to ride scooters on the sidewalk because Karen deemed them traffic hazards. The list grew uglier with every entry. I forwarded them all to the DOJ, labeling them evidence of systemic HOA abuse. The next morning, Karen struck again, but this time she overplayed her hand. She called a meeting of her self-appointed compliance task force and held it in front of the community clubhouse. Her plan was clearly to intimidate Uncle Marty and reassert control. Her hired goons were back, dressed in identical polo shirts, arms crossed like they were guarding a nightclub instead of a neighborhood lawn. Karen stood on the clubhouse steps with a megaphone, reading HOA code sections that didn't actually exist. "Effective immediately," she barked. "Anyone parking modified vehicles, trailers, or commercial-style vans will be towed at owner's expense. Violators will be fined per day." This is not a discussion. It was a performance. But unfortunately for her, she had an audience, and not the one she wanted. I was recording again. And this time, so were several other neighbors. One woman even went live on Facebook, narrating the scene like it was an episode of suburban reality TV. Karen realized too late that her crowd wasn't applauding. They were filming, whispering. Some even laughed. And then the best part. Uncle Marty rolled into the scene, not in his van, but in his wheelchair, holding a small flag that said, "ADA rights are civil rights." He parked himself right in front of her little security lineup and just sat there. Calm. Silent. Defiant. Karen tried to ignore him, then tried to outshout him. It didn't work. Her megaphone wobbled as she tried to maintain control. and when she snapped and yelled, "You don't belong here if you can't follow the rules." The silence that followed hit harder than any lawsuit ever could. That clip? It went viral before the HOA meeting ended. One neighbor posted it to a local forum. Another sent it to a reporter. I uploaded the full recording to the DOJ complaint file with a timestamp and note. The evidence was stacking up like bricks, and Karen had just handed me a bulldozer. Later that day, I got a call from the DOJ. They were fast-tracking the investigation. A field agent would be arriving by week's end to conduct interviews and review HOA procedures. They also recommended filing a temporary restraining order against further HOA interference. I agreed and started the paperwork. Karen had declared war, but she didn't realize she'd already lost the battle. The tide was turning. Magnolia Hills was waking up. And my uncle, quiet and strong, had just become the unlikely symbol of something far bigger than a van or a parking spot. He was living proof that when the powerful go too far, even the softest wheels can crush giants. The courthouse lobby buzzed with quiet tension as I stepped through the revolving glass doors, documents in hand and case file clipped with color-coded tabs. My mind was a laser, focused, calm, and completely fueled by what Karen had done. Beside me, Uncle Marty wheeled himself in with a polished calm that only veterans and saints could muster. He had refused to let me push him. "I've faced worse," he said softly. "Let her see I don't need saving. Just justice." That line hit harder than anything I could have said myself. A few neighbors had followed us, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because they were tired of silence. Because they'd seen what Karen had become. The hearing wasn't some massive jury trial, not yet. This was an emergency injunction filing, a preemptive strike to stop the HOA from further harassing Marty or anyone else while the investigation continued. I had filed it late last night, citing the Bodycam footage, ADA protections, and a pattern of retaliatory behavior from Karen and her self-appointed security force. But I had one more advantage. The judge assigned to the case, Harriet McIntyre, had a reputation for razor-sharp analysis and zero tolerance for abuse of power. Karen strutted into the courtroom in a beige pantsuit like she was about to accept a neighborhood award. Behind her were the same two gym bros, one chewing gum, the other looking around like this was the set of a courtroom drama. Karen's lawyer, an overconfident guy in a flashy tie who probably advertised on bus benches, carried a briefcase that matched his ego. He gave me a nod he probably thought was charming. I didn't bother returning it. When Judge McIntyre entered, everyone stood and the air shifted. She didn't waste time. "Ms. Lena Howard, Department of Justice Investigator, please summarize your emergency motion." I stepped forward, took a breath, and laid it out. I explained how the HOA had no lawful right to forcibly remove a disabled man from his vehicle. I presented the footage, the printed screenshots, the resident complaints, the forged violations, and the ADA citations that Karen had blatantly ignored. I kept my voice steady, deliberate, professional, but every word carried the quiet thunder of fury just beneath the surface. Then came the moment I played the Bodycam video. The room stilled as the clip projected on the courtroom screen. Karen sipping her coffee, her two enforcers grabbing Marty by the arm, the door yanked open, his cry of pain, and finally, her voice. He brought this on himself. The silence afterward wasn't just quiet. It was seismic. Even Karen's own lawyer stopped scribbling and looked sideways at her. One of the gym bros shifted uncomfortably in his seat and muttered, "I didn't know he was disabled." But the audio had already proved otherwise. Karen stood when the judge addressed her. "Do you have any explanation for this footage?" Karen smiled like she was at brunch. "Your Honor, that video is taken out of context. The community has been suffering from visual disruption and safety concerns due to improperly parked vehicles. My actions were solely for the good of the neighborhood." The judge leaned forward slightly. "So your defense is that a decorated veteran, confined to a wheelchair, is a danger to his own street because his van offends your sense of order?" Karen blinked. I mean, well, when you put it like that. It was like watching a house of cards fold in on itself. The judge turned next to Karen's lawyer. Mr. Fields, is your client aware that impersonating law enforcement, as her security detail did, is a criminal offense? Fields coughed. We, would like to request time to review the evidence more thoroughly. The judge raised an eyebrow. You can review it during sentencing if this motion proceeds to civil charges, which it likely will. The injunction was granted, effective immediately. The HOA could not issue further citations to Uncle Marty, interfere with his parking or access, or allow unlicensed personnel to act in any enforcement capacity. Additionally, the judge ordered a preliminary audit of HOA procedures, financial records, and board meeting minutes for potential federal violations. I saw Karen's lips tighten like she'd bitten into a lemon. After the hearing, I stepped outside with Marty and the small group of neighbors who had come to support us. Some clapped. Some offered hugs. One woman cried. Another man, probably in his 70s, approached Marty with tears in his eyes and said, "Thank you for standing up. I haven't parked my scooter on my porch in 6 months because of her. I'm bringing it back today." Word spread quickly through Magnolia Hills. By that evening, the HOA message board was flooded, not with the usual passive-aggressive Karen announcements, but with posts from residents emboldened by what they'd seen. Pictures of bird feeders were posted with the caption, "Still standing." A photo of someone parking their RV in their driveway popped up with a note that said, "Come find me, Karen." It was petty, and it was glorious. That same night, the HOA treasurer, Mr. Klein, knocked on Uncle Marty's door. He looked nervous, holding a folder and twisting his wedding ring. "I didn't know how bad it had gotten," he said quietly. "Karen does everything behind closed doors. She said the board approved all of it, but I never saw half this stuff. If the DOJ needs records, I'll cooperate." Inside the folder was a copy of recent financial statements, page after page of questionable spending. Landscaping invoices that didn't match work done. Security uniforms charged to HOA dues. A receipt for a $2,000 espresso machine marked as meeting supplies. I thanked him and assured him the truth would help clear his name. He left looking both relieved and terrified. The next day, I compiled everything into a digital case file. It was nearly 200 pages long. I sent it off to the DOJ's Civil Rights Division with a recommendation to pursue federal oversight of the HOA. Meanwhile, I filed a motion for a formal DOJ audit and an injunction that would freeze the HOA's enforcement powers pending investigation. I also forwarded evidence to the ADA's legal unit, including a request for criminal investigation into Karen's use of unlicensed enforcers. Karen, clearly rattled, attempted damage control. She sent an email to the community titled Misinformation and Integrity, claiming she was being unfairly targeted and that my uncle had provoked the incident. The backlash was swift. Dozens of replies stacked beneath the email, each one refuting her claims. Screenshot, video clips, quotes from the hearing. Someone even posted a meme of Karen's face pasted over a cartoon villain, holding a fake HOA badge. By the next day, the HOA's official website had been hacked to play Bad Boys on loop whenever you open the homepage. But while all of that was satisfying, it wasn't the goal. The goal was justice. The goal was to restore Uncle Marty's peace, dignity, and freedom to live without being harassed by someone playing dictator with a clipboard. The wheels of justice were moving, and Karen had no idea what was coming next. The best part? I hadn't even pulled out the big guns yet. But they were loaded, aimed, and ready to fire the moment she made her next move. By the time the DOJ's official inspection team rolled into Magnolia Hills, the entire neighborhood had morphed from a sleepy, manicured suburb into a simmering pressure cooker of whispers, cameras, and legal panic. The white SUV with federal plates pulled up mid-morning and parked right in front of the HOA office. The sight alone caused Karen's coffee mug to tremble in her hands as she watched from behind a lace curtain. She didn't come outside. Not at first. But the moment the agents stepped out, clipped badges shining under the bright sun, and began taking photographs of the clubhouse exterior, the war officially moved beyond neighborhood politics and into federal territory. I met the agents at the entrance, documents ready, a digital drive in my pocket, and every detail of the case already indexed. Agent Rowe, a quiet woman with razor-sharp eyes, took the lead. She didn't waste time on small talk. "We'll need access to all HOA records, both digital and physical, within the hour. Full cooperation is expected. If anything is missing, redacted, or edited, we will file obstruction charges." She said it so matter-of-factly that even I got chills. Inside the clubhouse, the agents set up temporary review stations. Laptops, scanners, recording devices. It looked more like a mobile crime scene unit than an HOA office. Karen finally appeared, face tight with what she probably assumed was composed elegance, though her stiff movements betrayed the storm inside her. She tried her usual trick first, flattery. "Good morning, agents," she cooed, holding out a tray of pastries. "I thought you might be hungry." No one touched them. Agent Rowe didn't even look up. "Please direct us to the secure file cabinets." As the investigation got underway, I turned my attention to damage control. Despite the injunction, Karen had managed to stir up a tiny but vocal minority in the neighborhood who believed she was being unfairly targeted. I suspected she had fed them lies, painting herself as the victim of a government witch hunt, claiming that Uncle Marty was exploiting his disability to soothe the community. Her manipulation tactics didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was how quickly those tactics collapsed under pressure. Word got around fast that federal agents were now stationed at the clubhouse. Residents began walking their dogs suspiciously close to the building. Others loitered nearby under the guise of checking mail or watering their plant. One man even set up a lawn chair across the street just to watch the chaos unfold. Every time Karen stepped outside, people either turned their backs or raised their phones, pretending to scroll but ready to record at a moment's notice. Her power, once absolute, was crumbling in real time. While the agents worked inside, I continued collecting statements from residents. One particularly damning testimony came from a former HOA board secretary who admitted that Karen had routinely edited meeting minutes before uploading them online. "She deleted entire motions," the woman whispered. "Sometimes she'd add made-up votes. I didn't say anything because she said I'd be fined for slander." Another neighbor submitted photos showing that Karen had installed surveillance cameras around her property, some of which pointed suspiciously at neighbors' yards. Clear overreach of any supposed security measure. The case against her was growing like wildfire. Financial records revealed she had used HOA funds to reimburse herself for events that never happened, community barbecues that were never hosted, repair projects paid to her cousin's fake business, and thousands in security expenses to her two gym goons, who had no licenses, no training, and no right to detain anyone. I had the receipts. The agents now had them too. Around noon, Karen made a desperate move. She stood outside the clubhouse with a megaphone once again, attempting to rally support. "We are under attack by bureaucrats who don't understand our community values," she shouted, pacing like a politician in crisis. "This is about keeping our neighborhood safe and beautiful." The only response was the chirping of a sprinkler system switching on nearby. A kid on a bike rolled by and yelled, "You're going to jail, Karen!" The crowd that had gathered chuckled quietly. She turned to me then, dropping all pretense. "You think this makes you a hero?" she hissed. "You're destroying everything we built here." I took a step closer. "You destroyed it the moment you laid hands on a disabled veteran and laughed about it." Her face twisted. She opened her mouth to respond, but Agent Rowe appeared beside me and cut her off. "Ms. Pendleton, we'll need to escort you inside for formal questioning." For the next 2 hours, Karen sat in a corner of the clubhouse while the agents questioned her, one recording device blinking steadily on the table. I watched through the glass while they showed her the Bodycam footage again, played the audio of her threats, and pointed to discrepancies in the financials. Her expression shifted from smug to confused to, finally, cornered. She tried to deflect, blamed others, and even claimed Marty had lunged at her, until the video disproved it entirely. At one point, she even tried to accuse me of hacking into the HOA website to fabricate fines. Agent Rose simply turned the laptop toward her, displaying her own email logs and timestamp. The truth, when handled correctly, is a brutal thing. When the questioning ended, Karen stumbled out the front doors, no longer the queen of the block, but just another HOA president facing federal charges. Her supporters, what little remained of them, didn't rush to her side. They scattered. One woman actually changed direction mid-walk to avoid being seen with her. Another quietly walked to Marty's house and left a homemade pie with a sticky note that read, "I'm sorry I stayed quiet." That night, a community meeting was held, not by the HOA but by the residents. Over 30 neighbors gathered in the park near the clubhouse. Marty was there, sitting proudly at the front. When he spoke, he didn't yell. He didn't condemn. He just told his story, clearly and calmly, about how all he wanted was a place to live in peace, not to be treated like a nuisance or threat. "This neighborhood deserves better," he said. "We deserve to feel safe in our homes, no matter how we get around." It was the most powerful thing said all week. The agents wrapped up their preliminary review and left with enough documentation to fill a courtroom twice over. DOJ oversight of the HOA was officially recommended. A formal audit was initiated. A criminal referral was issued for Karen and her patrol officers regarding ADA violations, financial fraud, and impersonating law enforcement. As I sat with Marty on his porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the rows of near-identical houses, he looked over at me and said, "I didn't think this would happen so fast." I smiled. Bullies fold quick when they're held accountable. He nodded. Still, part of me thought I'd be the one packing up. I shook my head. "You're not going anywhere." But she is. And somewhere down the road, Karen's pastel blouse and fake power might still hold weight in a different neighborhood, but not here. Not anymore. The house of cards had finally collapsed, and the wind that brought it down carried the scent of justice. Sunlight poured over Magnolia Hills as if the entire neighborhood had been waiting for this new day to arrive. It had only been a week since the federal agents wrapped their fieldwork, but the shift in energy was immediate and undeniable. Gone were the nervous glances, the hushed conversations, and the fear of receiving another violation notice for something absurd like a garden gnome or a lawn chair left out overnight. What replaced it was a cautious sense of relief, a shared breath finally exhaled, and something that hadn't existed here in a long time: hope. The federal oversight of the HOA was approved within 3 days of the investigation's conclusion. An external compliance officer was appointed to oversee all community operations until a new board could be formed. Karen's resignation was not voluntary, but it was dramatic. She was served official notice at her own front door, where a federal agent handed her an envelope containing the DOJ's findings, the civil penalties, and the criminal referrals. She tried one last time to bluff her way through it, threatening lawsuits and claiming persecution. The agent, unfazed, simply responded, "You'll need to speak with your lawyer. Everything from this point forward is official and binding." Karen's downfall made the local news within 24 hours. A reporter from the city paper had caught wind of the story after a neighbor leaked the Bodycam footage anonymously. The headline was simple but brutal: HOA president under federal investigation after assault on disabled veteran. The article spread like wildfire through social media, racking up shares, comments, and furious outrage from readers far beyond the gates of Magnolia Hills. Someone even edited the footage into a mini-documentary, complete with a dramatic voiceover and slow-motion clips of Karen screaming into her megaphone. A former resident in Florida saw the piece and sent in an affidavit stating she too had been harassed by Karen at a previous HOA years ago. The case had gone dormant, but now it was being reopened. Her history was catching up fast. The criminal investigation moved just as swiftly. Karen was formally charged with multiple violations, including assault, ADA interference, harassment, misuse of HOA funds, and impersonating law enforcement via her unlicensed patrol. Her 2 gym bros were also subpoenaed. One of them quickly flipped, agreeing to testify in exchange for leniency. He provided text messages, voice recordings, and payment receipts showing how Karen had orchestrated every move and tried to cover her track. With every piece of evidence, her defense crumbled further. But the best part wasn't watching Karen fall. It was watching the community rise. With the federal monitor in place, the residents of Magnolia Hills held their first open, unfiltered town meeting in years. No agendas manipulated behind closed doors. No threats of fines for speaking up. Just folding chairs set out in the park, clipboards passed around, and volunteers stepping up to rebuild what Karen had spent years controlling. My Uncle Marty, ever the quiet force of dignity, was invited to speak first. He wore his veteran's cap, his chair polished and clean, and his tone even. He spoke not just of what happened to him, but of what it meant. That someone with a disability should never have to justify their existence. That rules should protect communities, not be twisted into weapons. And that even in a place full of pretty houses and flower beds, rot can grow when good people are silenced. When he finished, the applause lasted a full minute. Some stood. Others wiped away tears. A neighbor brought forward a handcrafted sign, newly printed and bordered in gold trim. It read, "Reserved for our hero." It was mounted permanently at his usual parking spot, a formal gesture of apology and respect. Uncle Marty didn't cry, but his voice cracked when he said thank you. The changes came rapidly after that. The fake security patrol was disbanded entirely. A third-party security firm was vetted and hired under new, transparent guidelines. New signage went up around the neighborhood, including visible ADA-compliant parking and clear rules that aligned with both state and federal law. The clubhouse, once Karen's personal command center, was transformed into an actual community center, open to all, monitored fairly, and now featuring ramps and accessible restrooms. I kept my involvement minimal after the dust began to settle. The DOJ oversight team continued to handle the audits and legal follow-ups, but I had made my point. The system had worked. The neighborhood was no longer under the thumb of one woman's delusions of power. Marty was no longer a target. And the residents? They were now empowered, unified, and maybe a little embarrassed they hadn't spoken out sooner, but determined to make things right. One afternoon, I returned for a visit. It was Sunday. Clear sky, birds overhead, and the kind of warmth that makes you want to linger on the porch with a cold drink. Uncle Marty had arranged a barbecue with a few neighbors. The air smelled like ribs and grilled corn. Laughter floated through the yard. Music played from a portable speaker. It felt normal. Not tense. Not staged. Just good. A neighbor came over with her daughter, a bright-eyed kid in a wheelchair who had once been warned not to ride around the community for safety concerns. Now she zoomed freely through the street, waving to every house she passed. Her mother leaned in and whispered, "You didn't just protect your uncle. You protected all of us. Thank you." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded and watched the girl race down the sidewalk with a joyful squeal. That was all the thanks I needed. Later that evening, Marty and I sat on his porch sipping iced tea. He looked out over the block, his gaze peaceful. "Didn't think I'd be a symbol," he said with a smirk. "I just wanted to be left alone." I smiled. "Funny how standing your ground makes you a leader when no one else does." He nodded slowly. "Do you think she'll actually do jail time?" I shrugged. "Maybe. But even if she doesn't, she'll never hold power again. Her reputation's in shambles. And wherever she goes next, people will know exactly who she is." That was the real justice. Not just the court ruling, but the mark of truth finally catching up. The sun began to dip below the rooftops, casting golden light over the houses. A gentle breeze rustled the trees. A group of kids played tag down the street, one of them pausing to give Marty a high five before dashing off again. He chuckled. I like this place now. I leaned back in my chair. Told you it just needed a reset. Magnolia Hills wasn't perfect. No neighborhood ever is. But now it had something better than rules. It had awareness. And it had unity, the kind born not from shared interests, but from shared struggle. Uncle Marty became more than just a resident. He became a symbol of resilience. And Karen? She became the cautionary tale, proof that power, unchecked and ego-driven, always collapses under the weight of accountability. As I stood to leave, Marty reached over and squeezed my hand. You didn't have to do all this, he said. But I'm glad you did. I looked at him, smiled, and replied, I'd do it again. But next time? Let's pick a neighborhood with fewer Karen types. He laughed, the sound echoing down a street that finally felt like home. And as I drove away, I passed the wooden HOA sign at the entrance. Someone had updated it. The usual slogan was gone. Now it simply read, Justice, Integrity, Access for All. A neighborhood reclaimed. A message loud and clear.